In the dark world beneath the ocean waves, a silent battle for naval supremacy is constantly being waged. In this realm, the United States Navy has held a decisive advantage built upon a single, uncompromising doctrine. Every American submarine must be powered by a nuclear reactor. However, the debate over the future of the US Navy submarine fleet has resurfaced. As the underwater domain becomes more and more contested in the Western Pacific, some naval analysts and policymakers are questioning a foundational pillar of American submarine strategy established over 60 years ago. They are asking whether the US Navy should break its commitment to an all-nuclear submarine fleet and reintroduce conventionally powered submarines. The allure of building cheaper, more numerous diesel-electric submarines is understandable at a time when American shipyards are struggling to meet production demands. However, careful analysis reveals that bringing back non-nuclear submarines would be a profound mistake. The concept represents a dangerous illusion that would create major vulnerabilities in the Western Pacific. Following World War II, the American submarine force did not immediately transition into a nuclear-only fleet. For decades, the US Navy built and operated highly capable conventional submarines alongside the emerging nuclear designs. In the immediate post-war era, the US Navy constructed the Tang class, which incorporated advanced propulsion technologies captured from the German Type 21 U-boats, including the high-capacity battery plants and the snorkel. The Tang class was followed by the unique Sailfish class, which were configured as radar pickets to detect incoming Soviet bombers. The pinnacle of American conventional submarines arrived in the late 1950s with the Babel class, which adopted the revolutionary teardrop-shaped hull design, making them exceptionally quiet and agile for the time. Yet, even as the Babel class proved its worth, the advocacy of Admiral Hyman Rickover and the undeniable performance of early nuclear vessels pushed the US Navy toward an all-nuclear submarine force. The superior speed, endurance, and autonomy of nuclear propulsion quickly outclassed diesel designs, leading to a gradual phase-out. The final American conventional combat submarine, the USS Blueback, was decommissioned in 1990, cementing the US Navy as an all-nuclear submarine force. Despite the history, modern proponents of conventional submarines argue that the current situation justifies a return to non-nuclear vessels. For example, US Navy Lieutenant Commander Jim Holsell published an article in the US Naval Institute in October 2025 titled "Conventional Submarines Would Bring Affordable Lethality." He argued that the Navy should address its fleet deficits by collaborating with Pacific allies to build conventionally powered submarines focused on launching cruise missiles. By distributing offensive firepower across a number of affordable boats, the risk of losing expensive nuclear submarines in combat is reduced. Another article published around the same time by Lieutenant Commander Jordan Spector, again on the US Naval Institute, titled "The Path to a Bigger Submarine Fleet Includes Diesels," advocated for conventional submarines from another angle. The essay argues that relying entirely on nuclear production lines ignores the capacity limits of America's naval shipyards, and that the US Navy cannot build or sustain a large enough underwater force if it continues to lean solely on nuclear submarines. The arguments for conventional submarines generally rest on three pillars, beginning with procurement cost. A single modern Virginia-class nuclear-powered attack submarine, commonly referred to as an SSN, carries a price tag of roughly $4 billion. In contrast, the world's most advanced conventional submarines cost a fraction of that amount. Japan builds the respected Taige class, which uses cutting-edge lithium-ion batteries for roughly $600 million. Germany builds the Type 212 class for around $500 million. Proponents argue that for the price of one nuclear submarine, the US Navy could buy 5 or 6 high-end conventional boats, rapidly expanding its hull count. The second argument addresses the severe bottleneck in American shipyards. Currently, only 2 major shipyards, General Dynamics Electric Boat and Huntington Ingalls Newport News Shipbuilding, are capable of building nuclear submarines. Proponents suggest that conventional submarines could be built at the non-nuclear shipyards in the United States. This would theoretically expand the submarine industrial base without interfering with nuclear production lines. Finally, advocates highlight the technical advantages of conventional submarines in shallow littoral waters, such as the Sea of Japan, the East China Sea, or the Taiwan Strait. In these confined spaces, a diesel-electric submarine running purely on batteries can sit completely silent on the ocean floor, becoming nearly impossible to detect. However, while these arguments appear compelling on the surface, they break down in the face of the realities of industrial capacity and technological development. Introducing a conventional submarine program would actually fragment the shipbuilding base, not expand it. The United States has not designed or built a conventional submarine in over 60 years. To field a modern non-nuclear boat, the US Navy would have to design an entirely new class from scratch or attempt to license foreign technology. This would require dedicating a massive amount of engineering talent and research funding to develop technologies that the US has zero modern experience with, such as high-capacity lithium-ion battery systems and air-independent propulsion, known as AIP. This diversion of human and financial capital would occur at the exact moment the US Navy is trying to fix the systemic delays plaguing the Virginia-class attack submarine and the Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine programs. To say nothing of the delays facing other US warship procurement programs more generally, including the supercarriers and the amphibious assault ships. Furthermore, building 2 completely different types of submarines completely destroys economies of scale. Instead of streamlined supply chains for standardized components, the naval industrial base would have to support 2 separate sets of propulsion, spare parts, hull modules, and specialized training. Rather than relieving the strain on American shipyards, a conventional submarine program would add further stress on the already fragile industrial base, diluting the focus needed to maintain qualitative edge in nuclear propulsion. The most critical and devastating argument against the reintroduction of conventional submarines lies in geography and logistics. Conventional submarines, by their very nature, possess limited fuel capacity and endurance, and low speed. They cannot transit across the vast expanses of the Pacific Ocean from ports in San Diego or Pearl Harbor in any reasonable time frame. When they do arrive in the South China Sea, they will not be ready to fight. If a conventional submarine tries to make a 9,000-kilometer transit from Hawaii to the Western Pacific, it must travel at a slow, fuel-efficient speed of roughly 10 knots. This means the transit would take the better part of a month, leaving the crew fatigued and the vessel requiring immediate refueling and maintenance upon arrival. to be operationally useful in a peer conflict in the Western Pacific, conventional submarines must be based very close to the theater of operations. This means the US Navy would be entirely dependent on securing and maintaining access to forward naval bases in foreign nations, most notably Japan and the Philippines. This geographic restriction creates three major vulnerabilities. First, there is absolutely no guarantee that forward basing permissions will be granted or sustained during a major international crisis. International alliances are subject to shifting geopolitical and domestic pressures. In the lead-up to a potential conflict with a peer competitor like China, the host governments of Japan or the Philippines would face immense economic and military pressure. A host nation might decide to deny the US Navy permission to launch offensive combat sorties from its territory to prevent their own cities from becoming targets. If a host government closes its ports to American conventional submarines during a crisis, those vessels instantly lose any meaningful utility. They would be stranded thousands of kilometers away from their logistical lifeline, effectively neutralized without firing a single shot. Second, even if permission is granted and maintained, these forward naval bases are acutely vulnerable to military attacks, particularly from missiles and drones. Naval infrastructure are exceptionally large, visible, and high-value targets. Unlike military aircraft, which can be dispersed in the event of hostilities to multiple civilian airfields, highway strips, or even remote islands, a submarine cannot be deployed without highly specialized facilities. A submarine requires deep water berths, specialized heavy cranes to load the Mark 48 heavyweight torpedoes, battery charging stations, and large-scale fuel depot. In the Western Pacific, these naval facilities are concentrated in a very small number of locations, such as Sasebo and Yokosuka in Japan, Subic Bay in the Philippines, or the Guam Island. This concentration makes naval facilities vulnerable. In the opening hours of a conflict, a powerful adversary could launch hundreds of ballistic and cruise missiles to destroy the specific piers, cranes, and fuel depot. If the naval infrastructure is obliterated, a conventional submarine fleet cannot rearm or replenish its fuel. Its combat value drops to zero within days of exhausting its internal stores. Even if a conventional submarine is significantly cheaper to construct than a nuclear one, its actual return on investment becomes negative the moment its logistical foundation is destroyed. That is a poor investment with a capital P. Third, the logistical necessity of crowding conventional submarines into the first island chain forces a dangerous concentration of American forces within China's striking range. By placing a large portion of the underwater fleet in a few well-known geographic hubs close to the theater, the US Navy increases its vulnerability to a devastating first strike. A capable adversary can monitor these ports using intelligence and military satellites. They would know exactly how many American conventional boats are docked at any given moment, making them prime targets for a surprise missile volley. Forward basing during peacetime is required for conventional submarines to contribute meaningfully to deterrence, but this paints targets on their backs. The forward basing trap ultimately reveals that conventional submarines are not a cost-effective way to generate combat potential, but rather a recipe for potential disaster and concentrated vulnerability. In contrast to this logistical nightmare, the nuclear-powered attack submarine stands as the ultimate instrument of unconstrained power projection. Because an SSN is powered by a nuclear reactor, its range and endurance are virtually limitless. The reactor provides a continuous, abundant supply of electricity, fresh water, and oxygen. The only true limit to a nuclear submarine's endurance is the amount of food that can physically be packed into the hull to sustain the crew, which is typically around 90 days. An SSN can depart from a secure, heavily defended home port in the continental United States or from Hawaii. It can submerge immediately upon leaving port and transit thousands of kilometers across the Pacific Ocean at a sustained sprint speed of 30 knots. It arrives in the theater of operations within days, fully armed, completely self-sufficient, and entirely independent of foreign bases. A Virginia-class submarine can operate covertly in hostile waters for months, launch Tomahawk cruise missiles, or deploy special forces, and then transit back to the United States without ever needing to dock or to surface. This total independence from forward bases completely nullifies the geographic and logistical vulnerabilities that cripple conventional submarines. Beyond the massive strategic differences in logistics, conventional submarines suffer from certain technical disadvantages that limit their utility in high-intensity naval warfare. The most significant technical limitation is the requirement to manage internal energy stores. Whether a conventional submarine uses traditional lead-acid batteries, modern lithium-ion batteries, or an AIP system on top of the batteries, it relies on a finite stored energy. While an AIP system allows a submarine to remain submerged for up to 3 weeks, it can only do so if the boat moves at a literal crawl of roughly 5 knots. If the conventional submarine needs to move faster to intercept an enemy warship formation or to position itself for an attack, it must switch to its main batteries. At high combat speeds, these batteries deplete very quickly, often within just a few hours. Once this battery power is exhausted, the conventional submarine faces its most dangerous challenge. It must snorkel. Snorkeling requires the submarine to ascend to periscope depth and extend a mast above the surface of the water to draw in oxygen, allowing its diesel engine to run and releasing the exhaust gases to recharge the batteries. Snorkeling essentially shatters the submarine's stealth. The physical mast creates a distinct hydrodynamic wake and radar signature that can be detected by high-resolution radars carried on maritime patrol aircraft, like the Chinese Y-8Q, or by anti-submarine helicopters. Furthermore, running large diesel engines just below the surface releases heat into the water and expels hot diesel gases into the air. This is hugely problematic. The operation of diesel engines when the submarine needs to recharge creates a massive thermal signature, which of course can be detected by specialized infrared sensors on ASW aircraft. In a highly contested environment saturated with enemy drones, aircraft, and surface warships, many of which are designed to hunt submarines, snorkeling is a high-risk activity that can easily lead to detection and destruction. The lack of continuous, high-speed energy also robs the conventional submarine of operational flexibility. Because they cannot maintain a high sprint speed for prolonged periods, conventional submarines are far too slow to perform essential carrier strike group escort duties. They simply cannot keep up with a fast-moving aircraft carrier and its destroyer escorts as they maneuver across the ocean. Similarly, a conventional submarine cannot effectively trail or hunt a fast-moving enemy nuclear submarine, which can easily use its superior speed to open the distance and break contact. The speed deficit also becomes a fatal flaw during the evasion phase of an engagement. When a submarine fires a heavyweight torpedo, the launch and the weapon's acoustic trail immediately reveal the firing boat's general position to enemy forces. A nuclear submarine can survive this moment by utilizing its nuclear power to sprint quickly away from the launch position, escaping the search area before enemy helicopters or torpedoes fired by warships can arrive. A conventional submarine lacks the energy reserves or the propulsion to escape reliably. If it attempts to sprint away, it will completely drain its batteries within hours, leaving it slow and cornered. If it chooses to creep away quietly at a slow speed, it remains trapped within the search area, making it highly vulnerable to systematic detection by enemy active sonars. When an incoming torpedo is detected, a nuclear submarine has the option to try to get out of range of the torpedo by leveraging its own speed. A conventional submarine with a much lower top speed will have a much harder time getting out of range. Ultimately, the arguments for an all-nuclear submarine force comes down to a clear-eyed assessment built upon industrial, geographic, and logistical realities. The United States is a maritime nation separated from potential theaters of conflict by two vast oceans. Its primary military advantage lies in its ability to project decisive combat power across those oceans without relying on the permission to or the survival of vulnerable forward naval bases. The all-nuclear fleet is a geographical necessity. Cheap, numerous conventional submarines work well for some nations like China, Japan, and Russia. But for the US Navy, it's a dangerous distraction that fails to account for the fragmented industrial base, the logistical nightmare of the forward basing trap, and the tactical limits of battery power. By sticking resolutely to an all-nuclear attack submarine force, the US Navy ensures that its underwater fleet remains truly global, reasonably survivable, and actually capable of holding adversaries at risk anywhere on the globe.